Now, Africa Day is observed annually on 25th May to commemorate the founding of the Organization of Africa Unity, OAU, precursor of the African Union. The day provides an opportunity to recite the political and socio-economic achievements of African governments and African citizens. Joining us now is Eniola Harrison, a seasoned communication professional committed to Africa's transformation through strategic communication. She's the founder of HDH Consulting and Services, a Brussels-based communication consultancy, and she's the co-founder of Africa Communications Week. Also joining us is Farai Muvuti, political analyst of the South Africa Times. Good to have you both. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Now, I'll start with Eniola. Eniola, I'm sure you were monitoring some of the conversations that were had so far. We had to leave them at some point. But what was your impression of where the conversation was going generally?
So in terms of Africa Day,
yes.
And in terms of today, basically, one of the things that's really, really important is to magnify and to amplify the stories that we're telling about Africa's transformation. These stories must be told with our voices. Africa's reputation has a bottom line effect. It impacts everything from investment to exports to foreign policies, are starkly demonstrated in the past year public health communicators. And this is what Africa Communications Week actually does during this week of Africa Day, when we're celebrating Africa Day. We're talking about, perceptions about the continent. We're talking about bringing together communication professionals to think about how the work that we do, impacts the narrative about the continent, and how we can all collaborate effectively to drive that transformation, to drive that socioeconomic development.
And Farai, to you, strengthening Africa's transformation agenda or changing the African narrative, is that just a function of how we tell our stories and who tells them?
Yeah, precisely. It is a critical aspect of that. It's important to do so and to also be nuanced as we tell these stories, because over the years the narrative has been radically been based on issues pertaining to strife. You do not see a decolonial contextualized argument around the actual hopeful issues that are happening in Africa. We see one-sided pictures, which tend to focus primarily on a narrative of poverty or a narrative of disadvantage. But yet, we have a lot of things that are happening for us. We have fintech companies that are growing, a huge number of investment going into Africa that is actually domestic-based. We've had an incredible amount of growth in terms of economic growth. We have currently the diaspora, the African diaspora, actually contributes collectively, according to World Bank numbers, more than what we get in FDI, as well as what we get through foreign development aid. And these are stories and narratives that are not seen. So you'll almost see a picture of vulnerability of Africa. So it's very crucial, and I agree with my colleague, the previous speaker, how critical and crucial it is that we control these narratives by not only telling it ourselves, but equally shaping and ensuring that as it's distributed, it's challenged out there equally.
Okay, Eniola, forgive me, I had presumed you were following us in the conversation, the UBA conversation, so I was referring to that. But going back to something you've said, Africa's transformation begins with the many stories we choose to tell, and those stories must be told with our voices. And I want to ask, because Farai just talked about Africans in diaspora, what is the African voice? Since at this point in our development, we've had layers of influences that shape the African.
I mean, the truth of the matter is that, the voices, African voices are diverse and they're varied. So there is no single story. There's no single African voice, if you will. Of course, when we refer to the continent, we refer to it in its totality. But these voices, they include voices from the diaspora. They include voices that are not only in English, they're also in French, they're also in Portuguese, they're in many different languages. And they're coming across in different spaces. So we're talking about the media, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking about corporate organizations, nonprofits, really, the collective voice of Africans around the world in different spaces. That's what we refer to as as the African voice and narrative. And this narrative is, it's evolving, it's changing. It's not as, I would say, we're seeing an evolution. We've seen an evolution over the past few years, but more needs to be done. We need to step up our action, a little bit maybe less of talk and more of action, particularly around owning our media. I think this is one of the first steps that we can begin to take in shaping the stories that come out about the continent, in shaping, the narratives, in shaping the kinds of, views that we want to see about ourselves. And I think owning media is one step that we can begin to take. There is a lot of economics that also goes behind this, right? So it's not just about, the stories, but there's a lot of economics as well. Yeah.
Indeed. Farai, I wonder if you agree with Eniola, but I also like to ask you, because while there are so many things we can be proud of as Africans on a day like this, by the way, happy Africa Day to both of you. We certainly cannot ignore the conflicts, the hunger, the political instability in some parts. As we speak, there's uncertainty in Mali about a coup. So Farai, let me ask you about the role of our regional bodies. Eniola talked about how the media has a role to play, yes. But what about the regional bodies such as the African Union, the ECOWAS, and the rest of them on the continent? How do you think they've fared in promoting, a peaceful Africa, one that will celebrate our diversity? How have they fared in promoting economic growth, political stability? Have they done well?
Well, listen, a very good question that you're asking here, because the question really is, I think we tend to conflate two issues. When we say that reportage around Africa should be reshaped, or rather be reformed, we're not saying that the bad stories aren't to be told. We're simply saying that as they are told, they should be nuanced. You should display the complexities, the regional complexities. We should not simply say it is a corrupt, or there is bad, or there is good. Stories are not that simple. We're talking about nations that have histories, that are formed by multiple issues, that have histories that equally feed into the present. So our duty as communicators is to tell the story from its historical context, so as when one reads the present, they read it through a filtered, well-balanced, and with equal comprehension of the complexities of those regions and those countries thereof. You don't simply hear a story of Greece, for example, that, purely because, there has been an issue relating to economic meltdown, that is, Greece has failed as a government. We don't hear that. We hear the complexities of the central government there in terms of the EU funding. We hear the issues relating to its history with its marketplace. We hear the injection of all banking and so forth. The story is told, but we don't see the same thing as it pertains to Africa. You simply see a brandishing of one particular narrative. It may be corruption, or it may be the case that it's a failed state, or you hear the issues of regime. You don't hear the issues of regimes in Europe. Oh no, but yet Europe has multiple complexities as well. So we're simply saying that as these stories are told, they should be filtered through a nuanced, well-balanced narrative that equally enables people to understand the histories. Now, directly to your question relating to the coup and ECOWAS, I would put it this way to simplify the answer. Africa is not LA, okay? Nor is it Baghdad. Okay, so in terms of the performance of ECOWAS, one has to read it from its history. We have seen quite a huge amount of development. We have lesser civil wars than we've ever had in Africa compared to the 1980s. The level of crisis that we see right now is quite contextualized to a time of progression, if you are to look at it through the lens of history. Okay, and it also harks on to what this very day, people like Kwame Nkrumah, we envisioned this type of Africa that we would like to see. And what was the one area that he spoke of? He says he spoke of the importance of building regional structures, right, that feed out from, a collective continental unitarian approach, right? And I think that it's not just a regional issue, but it's equally a continental issue. So how we read these issues, we must not separate the continental performance thereof. Okay, so it's important to read it as it is. And speaking to this specific issue, I think as it continues to develop, and if you are not, and let us not forget the external forces that play in, be it the French and so forth, right? So these issues are quite complicated. But given time, I think we might see a better outcome.
Okay, this is to you, Eniola, and not to be seeming to be touting one side of the narrative, but what do you say to those who would say that our failure so far to shape our own narrative is merely a reflection of our failure in other spheres, whether economic or political? And then on the back of that, would you see then taking charge of the narrative and changing the narrative as a tool? I know Farai spoke of telling the nuanced story and telling it in the historical context as a tool of inspiration, even in the midst of our still making wrong decisions.
That's a really good question. I definitely do not see it as a failure. In the same way, maybe potentially there are failures in other ways. I think that, just in terms of, if you look at history, there's also a progression, there's an awakening, and there needs to be an investment. It's more of a focus in this particular area. It's also about understanding that there is a link between perception and even economic development, because I think that historically, we're more focused on, the challenges, the problems that we've had to face, without actually realizing that with data to support that there's actually a link. This actually affects the bottom line. Your reputation, the country's reputation affects the bottom line. And I think that as more and more governments, as more and more, professionals, industry begins to take, are beginning to recognize how important this is and how linked it is, for example, to FDI flows, risk perception, that is directly linked to FDI flows, then there will be more investment in this area. We have skilled professionals we have more than enough skilled professionals across the continent who are doing this at the corporate level. They're managing brands, they're managing, corporate reputations. So this is also the same sort of thing that we can be doing at the country level. And I think that government professionals as well just need to recognize that there is a link. It isn't just, the thing you keep at the back burner, but it actually should be at the forefront of the development agenda. There are certain countries across the continent that do take this seriously at the governmental level, and we can see how they're actually managing and shaping their reputation. Take Ghana, for example, or take Rwanda as an example. These are countries that are actively managing their reputation because they have realized and recognized that there is that link. So I think that it's beginning, and we hope that we will begin to see this take shape in the future. And as to your second question, yes, I think that it is a tool. I think that it is an absolute tool. I think that, this is a really great opportunity right now. We are, at a really, I think, important nexus where we as communication professionals, we in the media can begin to actively, use communication, use media to shape these stories. Africa's time is now. I mean, even on the global stage, we have fantastic entertainment. We have fantastic culture, and the power of culture to really begin to change how people view a country, a people, a nation. Well, I think is
very well said, Eniola Harrison and Farai Muvuti. Thank you so much, and once again, happy Africa Day to both of you.